You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel. And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most important topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 293rd edition of Assembly Call Radio and our 949th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of June 1st, 2023. I am your host, Jerod Morris. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Smart takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This week's banner moment occurred on Wednesday night at this week's Hoosiers for Good NIL event at Huber's Winery. Mike Woodson and Tom Allen were there, along with Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway, and Sidney Parrish. And out of everything that was said while speaking to the media, one line from X stood out above all others. Asked about his health, X said he is 100% healthy. Nothing could be more important to this year's IU basketball team than that. Well, X isn't the most talented or most versatile player on this year's team, nor did he have the greatest recruiting pedigree. He is undoubtedly the most essential piece on this year's roster, tasked with leading the offense, spearheading the defense, and being the emotional and vocal leader on the court. And by every single indication we could possibly have, based on his public comments and the lack of any off-court nonsense, he's more ready for the role than he's ever been before. As X also mentioned at Huber's, Mike Woodson even sought his counsel this offseason on the players Indiana was recruiting. Who would he be interested in playing with? You won't be surprised to learn that X is very high on what Kalel and McKenzie can bring to the table. He's also ready for the mentorship role that will be expected of him with freshmen Gabe Cupps and Ja'Kai Newton. What does an Indiana team with a player as volatile as X as its emotional center actually look like when the games actually start? I'm fascinated to find out. It seems inevitable that there will be ups and downs, but the self-awareness X has shown this offseason suggests he may be ready to smooth out some of that volatility. As long as it doesn't take away the edge that makes X a special player on both ends of the court, that will be a huge positive for Indiana. But above all else, Indiana just needs a full season of health from X, so it's great to hear that he will enter summer workouts at 100%. Indiana had a Final Four ceiling last season with a healthy X. Unfortunately, we never got the chance to see it develop. With the talent, length, and potential versatility of the rebuilt roster Indiana has for this upcoming season, that same Final Four ceiling does still exist, but will be even more reliant on X's availability, leadership, and production. He has a chance to be one of the very best two-way lead guards in America, and when you've got a guy like that, and he's healthy and fully engaged, you've always got a chance. All right, now let me introduce my co-hosts this week. Andy, Coach, and Ryan are all off this week, enjoying a little off-season R&R. But here with me are a couple of coaches ready to nerd out on IU and Big Ten hoops. First, we have a basketball coach turned business leader, the founder of IU Film Room, and a proud papa to two sharpshooting future Hoosier guards in the classes of 2037 and 2039. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Coach Adragna.
It's Coach Adragna. No matter where you're looking, never gonna find a man with a plan to use all that he knows to educate the fan as he breaks down the X's and O's.
Tony breaks it down. Woody draws it up. Tony breaks it down. Woody draws it up. Tony breaks it down. Woody draws it up. Tony breaks it down.
Some of Bob Thompson's finest work right there. Tony, what are your thoughts on this week in IU basketball?
Yeah, it never gets old hearing that opening from Bob. Just excited to be here first and foremost. It's been a bit of time since I've been here on the actual Assembly Call Radio. Done some emergency podcasts here and there when we've gotten the commitments, but been quite some time since I've been on here. So super excited to be here, chat with yourself and Coach Bob Moats. I think the Big Ten had a big week in terms of guys that returned. All things considered, obviously there were some guys that stayed, guys that went. But I think as a whole, yesterday essentially was a big day for the Big Ten. And I know we'll get into that here a little bit later, but Always excited to be here on Assembly Call. Always excited to talk some IU hoops.
Absolutely. All right. And also joining us tonight, a special guest from our community who has coached youth basketball for 24 years in the Columbus, Indiana area, most recently in the Columbus Revolution program and at Parkside Elementary. It is Bob Moats. Bob, we don't yet have special intro music for you, but as you know, Tony's example has proven, you keep showing up, Bob Thompson will eventually produce a banger in honor of your presence. But thanks for being here, man. What's on your mind this evening?
Well, first off, I would be interested to hear it, and my wife would probably not want to hear that every time I walk into a room in the house. So, but yeah, all the more reason to do it, I think. Always great talking to you guys about IU and basketball across the board. It's funny. It's almost like we kept thinking with portal season, when is it supposed to end? And I think it's the never-ending story. Although we're beginning to we're getting some inclinations. I mean, it's really been an exciting week now that the draft field is set. That, there are some teams that are kind of like Graham Rahal sitting in his car waiting at the end of qualifications of bump day going, oh man, I may have been left behind. And, you're seeing some of these programs, surprising programs like Kentucky, for example, who are just like, you're kind of seeing maybe some shifts in college basketball across the board. That maybe some of the luster on some programs that we've always thought would just be, always up there with talent, maybe struggling to find a way to get the teams that they're used to getting in those places. And it's just been an incredibly interesting and exciting, 2 months of off season, just kind of watching how this develops and watching how we all kind of have kind of followed this, and then the excitement and the continuous, what do you call it? Speculation, I guess, for lack of a better term. Like every time a new name hits the market, everyone's going, well, do we want him? Are we going for him? Are we getting him? And it's just a compressed sort of joy almost to watch people react.
It is. Yeah. I mean, guys, hold a good thought for, Kentucky. It's been rough for them. Only 7 scholarship players currently. Some rough times in Lexington. So let's pour one out for Kentucky. All right, here's what we have in store this week. Segment 1, we've got a loaded set of Hoosier headlines, including all those Big Ten stay or go decisions that you guys talked about, and then we're gonna have a little fun talking lineup combinations with this rebuilt Indiana roster, and then with whatever time we have left, we will dive into the mailbag. All of that coming this week on Assembly Call Radio. But first, let's talk about our presenting sponsor. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this edition of Assembly Call Radio, just like all shows on the Back Home Network, presented by our friends at Home Field Apparel, where they have the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you're going to find anywhere. And what's great about Home Field Apparel, it's not just IU, it's not just the Big Ten. They've got apparel from colleges and universities across the country, which makes it a great place to stop and shop for yourself, to stop and shop for friends, because they really do have something for everybody. And as you know, their whole business model is going into the archives of these different schools and universities and pulling out, these logos and brand marks that haven't been used in years, decades, centuries even, and breathing new life into them. They print them on the most comfortable materials. You got t-shirts, crew necks, hoodies, jackets, hats. They just continue to expand. And I just saw a tweet from them that they just found, I think, a box or two more of the IU bomber jackets. So those are going to be going back up on the site. So there's always something. Subscribe to their email list, follow them on Twitter. They're always coming out with, school refreshes, launching new schools. It's just, they're a great company. We really appreciate their support, and we love supporting them. So we highly encourage you to go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME, HOME. That'll get you 15% off your first order. But also, again, keep your eyes peeled on the email list and their app, because they always have deals that are coming out. Maybe a 20% off flash sale here or there. So there's always ways to save, but go to homefieldapparel.com, use that promo code HOME, and you will get the best college apparel that you will find anywhere. Again, the website, homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. All right, guys, let's roll through some Hoosier headlines here. First of all, Thomas Bryant, Victor Oladipo, Cody Zeller, all in the NBA Finals. I mean, Victor is hurt. Thomas isn't exactly getting a whole lot of playing time, but I do believe Cody Zeller has already seen the floor tonight, if I read the chat comments correctly. So Cody out there doing his best to try and contain Nikola Jokic. So, good for those guys. Wish them all, obviously, a lot of luck. And for Victor, wish him, a quick recovery from his latest injury. Kalel Ware was selected to participate in USA Basketball's Under-19 men's national team training camp. So he will go through that process and see if he gets selected for the team. Did see today that he arrived in Bloomington. Saw that Gabe Cupps arrived in Bloomington. Ja'Kai Newton arrived a couple days ago. So guys are getting on campus and getting ready to prepare for summer workouts. Speaking of that, Mackenzie Mbako ends up at number 10 on the RSCI index, which basically takes 24/7 and all the other rating services and compiles them into one rating. He was the top recruit in the Big Ten this year at number 10. Other names that you will recognize: Xavier Booker, number 14, Cohen Carr, number 26. They are both going to Michigan State. Deshaun Harris-Smith, who Indiana was interested in at one time, number 30, going to Maryland. Jeremy Fears, Gavin Griffiths, Tayson Chapman, Devin Royal, Scott Middleton, all in the top 50, going to Michigan State, Rutgers, and Ohio State, respectively. Gabe Cupps and Ja'Kai Newton just missed the cut. Gabe was number 92 at 24/7. Ja'Kai was number 115 at 24/7. They did not make the RSCI index, but they're just on the outside looking in. But hey, always nice when you have the top-rated recruit in the conference, and that is what Indiana has with Mackenzie Mbako. And then we got some interesting news in terms of guys Indiana may be pursuing in the transfer portal. Does anybody know how to pronounce this gentleman's last name? Because I don't want to butcher it. And I tried, but I couldn't quite get the pronunciation. Mike Shirajams. Sorry, if he becomes a Hoosier, I promise I will get it right. I think that's why everybody calls him Mongolian Mike, the first player from Mongolia to play college basketball in the United States. He's a freshman from Dayton, had put his name in the NBA draft, took it out, was also in the transfer portal, and so he's down to Indiana and 4 other schools, although at this time it's a little uncertain how serious Indiana is. They've kind of done some groundwork, it sounds like, to put themselves in position, and this is a guy, 6'8", skinny, will obviously need to get in the weight room, but has a lot of really intriguing perimeter skills and athletic ability. And so he is an intriguing name. So he's just one to have on the radar screen to keep your eye on, but we'll track that and see, how serious Indiana actually is about pursuing him. Tony, any of those notes pique your interest or that you have any thoughts on before we talk Big Ten stay-go decisions?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of, what you mentioned with the RSCI index, having the best player in the conference, I believe that's 2 years running now, right? I think Jalen Hood-Schifino was number best in the conference last year coming in.
Yes.
That's big time, obviously for what Mike Woodson's doing on the recruiting trail. This was kind of looked at as a down class, if you will, for Indiana, and are still bringing in the best player in the conference, at least on paper. Which is also obviously a good thing. I think it's Sheriff Yamps was how I heard him. I was watching some film on him yesterday. Yeah. And it sounded like that's how the announcers were saying his name, but I could be wrong too. But anyway, I think he's a super skilled basketball player. He's 6'8", 180 is what he was listed at Dayton. That frame just wouldn't be able to sustain Big Ten play night in, night out if he's still at that 180 mark. I mentioned in a Discord group that we're all in that, if he is put on some weight, I'd be intrigued on what he could become at IU because of the skill that he has, because he is very skilled. His shot is pure. Didn't shoot it at a super great percentage last season, but he's
not
got
bad for a freshman, though.
Exactly. And got a good looking stroke. His passing ability, 21% assist rate is great. Sometimes tries to hit the home run a little too often, so his turnover rate was also high. But I'm with you. Everything I've heard about him is that IU's done some groundwork, but they're also kind of mulling, some of these guys that just came back to school yesterday, but didn't necessarily say they're going back to the school they were at previously. So kind of seems like a backup plan. I did see from Draft Express that Mongolian Mike had said that he wanted to make his decision this week. to me, that would seem to take IU out of the running. That's not me reporting anything. That's just me speculating. But you never know. The portal's crazy. So, interesting. I tweeted yesterday that I was going to do a thread on him. And then as I started diving in a little bit more, I was like, I'm going to wait until
Maybe wait
see
on
how
that one.
serious IU is.
Yeah, and we'll spend more time doing scouting reports and stuff like that. He's a freshman. I don't think you necessarily get him to have a huge impact next season. I think you would want him on probably a developmental path for a couple years, both physically and with the shot and some of those things. But, Bob, Mongolian Mike kind of fits the profile that Broad Ripple Mike likes to use when building teams, which is a lot of length and versatility. So just the interest, I think, gives us kind of one more data point on the kinds of players that Indiana is looking to target.
Yeah, and I with Mike in particular, I'm not really sure. Again, back to Tony's point, 180 pounds. I graduated high school at 180 pounds. I was skinny as all get out, and I'm 9 inches shorter. So I mean, I don't know. A stiff fall breeze in Bloomington can take him out to maybe Nashville. I mean, I may get him in my front lawn if I'm not careful in Columbus. But I'm always kind of cautious when I see a kid release a top 5 like that, where it just kind of smacks me out of the blue. And this is pure speculation on my part. Whereas like conversations are happening, maybe, not really sure how this is working as in a sort of rapid segment. But a kid like Mike may be going, you know what? I've talked to Indiana. They're on my top 5. So I'm really interested. Let's see if the Hoosiers will, continue. And, and not saying that he's not going to end up here or where he's going to end up, but yeah, it was one of those kind of caught me a little bit out of the blue, just kind of seeing where he is. Again, clearly a very skilled player. I'm of the opinion, I don't see him supplanting really anybody for playing time this year, maybe the year after, but it's definitely kind of showing, again, back to this thing that Mike Woodson likes length. He likes guys, versatile guys who are long, in many respects lean, can be very disruptive on the defensive end, can do multiple things on the offensive end. Again, anytime you get a kid who's 6'8" who passes the ball like this kid does, you definitely want to take a second look. You're not just going to be like, well, hard pass. If there's a way to get him in and get some development, I have no issues there. I'd also like to add, having Khalil Ware as a on the U19 tryouts, that anymore, the way international basketball and the way USA basketball does what they do, it's I think more indicative of what a player is going to do long term than almost any other indicator, because the amount of research that goes into deciding who the next amateur or the next international players are going to be for this country, the amount of development that they put into the international game in particular, is pretty remarkable. And for him, he's going to be playing against the best of the best of the best in that age group over the during that process. And so you can kind of we'll get a better indication of what he's able to do, but also be able to see that here's where his ceiling really may lie, and really kind of give a good baseline as we start off with him coming to IU.
Yeah, maybe don't write off a 7'1" guy with versatility who was a top 10 recruit just because he struggled 1 year as a freshman far away from home. Like maybe give that guy some benefit of the doubt. So, yes, I agree with you. Okay, the last headline that we're going to talk about, and we're going to hit this briefly, but we promise we're going to be revisiting this a lot in the offseason as we preview the Big Ten, but we don't want to dive into it too much yet just because we don't have all the full rosters. But we did get some huge news this week on guys who had put their name in the NBA draft, got some feedback, and then just either decided to stay or go. So I'm sure you've probably heard most of these names. Zach Edey coming back to Purdue. Terrence Shannon and Coleman Hawkins coming back to Illinois. A.J. Hoggard and Jaden Akins coming back to Michigan State. Keisei Tominaga coming back to Nebraska. We already knew that Boo Buie was coming back to Northwestern, and Cliff Omorui going back to Rutgers. And then guys who are leaving, most guys that we expected. Jet Howard, Kobe Buffkin, Bryce Sensabaugh, Chris Murray, all staying in. We expected that. Chase Audige from Northwestern, I think, somewhat of a surprise that he's leaving. And really is, I think, a big loss for a Northwestern team that was really keyed by that backcourt. And even though he was an inconsistent shooter, really did a lot for them in terms of, defense and steals, and just really made it tough for opposing guards. So, real quick, Tony, as you hear those names, any surprises there or any that you in particular want to comment on in terms of how it will affect the Big Ten next year?
Yeah, I'm with you. I thought Audige was an interesting one. He seemed somewhat of like a Jekyll and Hyde for Northwestern last season. I mean, he could shoot them in games, and against IU, he almost shot him out of it after a big lead. So obviously, must have gotten good feedback on his skill set from NBA folks, or just thought, hey, it's time to go. But that one was interesting, and then. Edey was interesting to me, just because it seemed like there was a lot of positive feedback coming from what he was able to do at some of his pro days in the combine and things like that. It sounded like he was able to move his feet a little bit better than folks thought. He was hitting, obviously, set shots from the same spot is obviously a lot different than game shots, but was hitting 3-pointers from out there. So that one was interesting. It's somebody that I anticipated coming back. Coming into portal season. And then as I started reading more and more, it sounded like people were talking, hey, this might be a late first rounder into like mid 40s. Sounded like he ultimately was looking for a 2-year guarantee from some team in order to stay in, and ultimately didn't get that. But, it would be interesting what that means for the rest of the Big Ten. Obviously, Purdue was very good last season in the regular season. But, what I also want to point out is that their last 12 games of the year, they were 7-5. And so it's kind of one of those things where did people kind of figure out how to play them? And does that mean, they basically got their whole roster back? Is that necessarily a good thing or a bad thing for them? So obviously, like you said, we'll talk a lot about those things as the year goes on, but, just intrigued by that.
Yeah, my only request is now that Edey's back, can we please move beyond the he's just tall nonsense? Like, yes, he's a little bit limited as an offensive player, but
yeah.
I just like it's just really it's just dumb analysis. I think like the guy can do a lot of things. He's not just tall. So I would like for us to be able to move beyond that. We can root against him and talk trash against them, but let's at least make it an intelligent basketball conversation, please. Bob, your thoughts on the stay or go? Also, Paul McCahey from Rutgers. For some reason, it took like a day for it to get out, but he's coming back as well. Which is good because really, if he would have stayed in the NBA, he really would have been tripping to make that decision. So,
I think.
We got Bob.
You got me. You got me on that one. I think Tom Izzo's a happy man, to be perfectly honest. I think he is, with Hogard and Aiken coming back. That's big for his big for his program, big for his chances going into next year with what he has coming in as well. He's putting together a Big Ten championship caliber team. Back to, again, we're to just briefly hit on the Edey, thought was, the drama leading up to it yesterday was very interesting to kind of watch that. Well, will he stay? Will he go? And, trying to figure out, well, what would Purdue, it was kind of fun for me to play the game. What would Purdue actually do if Zach Edey said, I'm going pro? At this point, where does Purdue go from their mindset, how, the philosophies on the offensive and defensive ends, because they just seem to be so dependent on that very gifted sort of unicorn post player that really nobody else in the country is using in that sort of way, the way that Purdue's using them. So it's going to be interesting to watch kind of Purdue develop, in recruiting over the next couple of seasons, as well as, how they're going to play next year. Because I think Tony hit the nail on the head. Their guards are good, but their guards are not athletic in the same sense as most of your contending programs. If you look at the top 10, one of these things does not look like the other, and Purdue's backcourt kind of jumps out at you there. And if, depending on how their schedule looks next year, which is going to be a tougher Big Ten schedule, it's going to be interesting to kind of watch. Can they replicate what they have without playing Nebraska twice, or that the bottom of the conference? They couldn't
have an easier Big Ten schedule than what they got last year. So,
it's like literally, speed bump. It was a speed bump, and we're looking at a brick wall sometimes. So it's like, wait a minute, how this? We know how it happens. It's just luck of the draw, or the rotation and all. But but I think there should be some really happy teams in the. I think I also think it's interesting to see. Interesting, we knew Murray was going, And with Rebraca leaving, Murray gone, I'm questioning kind of how Fran's going to respond, without having that one person in their zone press defense, without having that guy that's really just a very, very talented big wing. And is that something IU can exploit when they're playing? I mean, I think this year IU may have the best overall big wing coming into the conference in Mbako, and I'm struggling to see where that's going. Same with how other teams are going to kind of guard a big wing offense that IU may be putting out.
Yeah.
Speaking of Fran's team, I did see that there are Final Four for Grant Nelson. So there could be your big long wing unicorn.
Boy, if I was a guy like that, given how they feature that position, I would go there in a heartbeat.
100%.
Rack up some stats. I mean, because they've had 3 straight seasons. It was Garza, I guess, for 2 seasons, then Keegan Murray, then Chris Murray, that have just been featured and racked up all kinds of stats. So it's they've kind of got the infrastructure there, but they need that guy, which they don't have right now. As for Purdue, we'll talk about them more as we go through the offseason. It really kind of feels like they need Colvin or Hyde to be an impact guy early, because that gives them the kind of athletic wing they haven't had that could kind of help change the complexion of what they can do. So, my first thought when Edey came back is, okay, that raises their floor. They're now a top 5 team probably in the regular season. Raises their floor for the regular season, but does it lower their ceiling for postseason? It may. So we'll watch that develop. Here's the last thing I want to, kind of get your guys' thoughts on here before we move on. I just kind of tried to do a real quick exercise and put the Big Ten teams into tiers, how they look right now. So let me give you my tiers. And again, this wasn't real scientific. I just kind of went on gut feel, kind of looking at the rosters and the guys they have coming back. And the rosters aren't done yet, so this could change. To me, the top tier is Michigan State and Purdue, and I think it's 1A and 1B. I think, to me, Michigan State is the clear favorite given the talent, the experience, the coach, like everything that they have. I think they're the clear favorite. I think Purdue is the clear number 2 right now. If you're just looking at it regular season, kind of who do you trust the most and who has the fewest question marks for regular season, I look at it like that. The next tier to me are teams that clearly have talent. Some of it is new talent that is unproven, but they've got the ceiling to win or compete for a Big Ten title. I've got Indiana at the top of that tier, Illinois, Maryland, Wisconsin, Ohio State. Wisconsin doesn't profile from the talent perspective, but they just got a lot of good Wisconsin dudes back, and we've learned enough to not discount them, so I had to throw them in there. And I kind of reluctantly put Rutgers in there because they've got Mulcahy, they've got Omoruyi, they've got a top 50 freshman coming in. And I just feel like the way they've beaten us, I should probably give them some respect, although I could see them going in the next tier, which I have Iowa and Michigan. And they're kind of here because they're not done building their rosters yet. So they've got some good players, but they just don't have really a go-to guy, or they're missing some things. So they could jump up, but if they don't make any big moves, that's kind of where I see them. And then at the bottom is Northwestern, Nebraska, Penn State, Minnesota, kind of in that order, where Northwestern and Nebraska have some interesting pieces, but I still don't really trust them, and they lost some key guys off their team from last year. And Minnesota and Penn State, I think, are clearly the bottom of the Big Ten, just based on, continuity, talent, all that stuff. What do you guys think of that? Anything kind of out of bounds there? Do you feel especially strong about, one of those teams that should be in a different tier? Tony, you first.
Is this regular season, like Big Ten tiers?
Yeah, I'm just talking about Big Ten play.
Yeah. I think Indiana has a roster that may not necessarily be built for Big Ten play or winning a Big Ten title, but might have the second highest ceiling beside Michigan State in terms of postseason potential. And so it always gets kind of cloudy for me when I start talking Big Ten and postseason, because it's such vastly different styles of play, which that could be its own show in and of itself. Just talking about that. But I don't think anything that you said is out of bounds. I think Michigan, if they don't get some more pieces, they're going to really struggle.
If you haven't looked at Michigan's roster, like what they have, it is bad right now. Like they don't even really have a team yet. It's kind of crazy.
It's bad. I love watching Ant Wright on Twitter, just kind of laughing at that.
Kentucky at least has the best recruiting class in the country coming in,
Correct.
so they can just throw those 5 guys out there. Michigan, whew.
It's ugly.
Oh,
I mean,
man.
and as we noted, it's not done. But if it's not, I would move them down to that bottom tier. Nebraska is intriguing to me. It's kind of like I thought Hoiberg was a grand slam hire for them, but now he's in year 5 or 6. I mean, he's been there a while. It hasn't really made much noise, so I'm kind of interested on if this is like a make or break year.
They lost Griesel and Walker.
Yeah,
you look at it and it's like, what are
it's
they
tough.
building around?
And and that's a program. They fired Tim Miles and he made an NCAA tournament and like he was kind of turning that thing around. So I don't see them being too terribly patient with Hoiberg. So I kind of feel like there might be some angst there, and maybe I don't know, maybe he pulls a rabbit out of his hat and kind of gets a mid-tier Big Ten team and takes him to the tournament and kind of saves his job. But I don't really like Rutgers' roster, but I didn't this past season either. And they always
I just kind of trust Peichel, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say it had been a little bit of fun watching their fan base somewhat melt down the last couple of weeks, as guys were decommitting and things like that. But, I'm pretty much on par with where you're at in terms of the outlook for next season. I think the way you kind of split up the tiers makes a lot of sense.
There's a part of me that wanted to put Indiana kind of at number 3 on our own, because I do think we clearly have the second most talent, and we have a potential first-team All-Big Ten point guard. And I know there's some other holes and question marks, but, I feel strongly about that. Now, if Illinois can get a point guard, I think, you probably put them up there too. But I kind of agree with you, Tony. I feel like there's going to be a lot of ups and downs for this Indiana team because you got young guys, you got a lot of new guys, but it does feel like a team that could really hit its stride by February and March, and that profiles to be, almost more well-suited to tournament play than the grind of Big Ten play. We'll see. Bob, any final thought on this? Any strong feelings?
No, I think you hit the tiers almost perfectly. The one thing I will say, and I will eat these words not gladly in 6 months when it doesn't come to fruition, but every year I look at Wisconsin and I go, water's got to find its level, and it kind of did last year to a certain degree. It really did. And I'm never really too sold on Wisconsin. I'd almost be like putting them in that third tier along, maybe with Rutgers at this point. And then you get into Big Ten play and you're going, how'd they pull that one out? How did this one happen? And so it's just going to be interesting to see if this is a year where if Wisconsin has another year like they did kind of last year, where they're kind of in that lower part of the bottom pack. It may just be something of the question there will be, well, what does Greg Gard do next? Does he change his approach? Because maybe the Dick Bennett to Bo Ryan approach that's worked there since the late 90s has just run its course. But no, I'm really interested to see how IU kind of just starts off. But really, it's to me, I'm thinking it's not where we're starting, it's where we're finishing. And I keep going back to that thought in my head that I'm interested to see this team March 1st. As excited as excited as I will be to see them November 1st, I'm really excited to see them March 1st and see where they've grown, how they've developed, and can this team figure out, can they play together effectively and find their roles and find their mojo at the time when it means the most.
Yeah. Well said. All right, coming up here on Assembly Call Radio, it is time to take a closer look at the roster that Mike Woodson has built. And what are some of the most interesting lineup combinations that we're curious to see on the court? Not who we think is going to start, just that we're curious to see. There's some interesting combos. Stick with us in the Assembly Call. All right. Thanks to everybody who is here live, watching Cody Zeller and the Heat on one screen and then watching us on the other. We appreciate it. I kind of thought Miami would jump out to an early lead since they've played 4 games since Denver last played, but Denver's up by 17 because their offense is unstoppable.
Elite.
Like, what would you do? What would you do to guard Denver?
Ask somebody smarter than me.
Yeah, but really, what do you do with Jokic and Murray besides clone OG Anunoby? And then you got Porter out there. I mean, it's really watching them play offense has just been so much fun.
Well, yeah, and then when Gordon's 7 for 9 with 14 points tonight, like that's impossible. Like Jokic has shot 3 shots, made them all.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He's amazing, man.
10 points,
So
10
much
assists.
fun.
The best defense against them, score more points, try to find a way.
Yeah.
It's just lace them up and go, because
And for Miami,
I think
they're going to struggle to do that.
Yeah.
this not a matchup that's good for them
Yeah.
in that regard.
That is true. All right, let's hop into this. Tony, let's talk newsletter off the top.
Perfect.
Here we go.
Hi, it's Thomas Bryant. What's the only thing better than being Kentucky in the NCAA tournament? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join Jerod, Andy, Ryan, and Coach after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
Also making the NBA Finals. Pretty cool, which Thomas Bryant is doing. You make the NBA Finals, you get your intro played on the Assembly Call. So good luck to Thomas. Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Jerod Morris, here with the coach, Tony Adragna. No matter what idiots on Twitter say, he's still a coach to us, damn it. And Coach Bob Moats. Appreciate both of you guys being here. And Tony, we have a fun little announcement here. Kind of a soft launch of something that we're doing. For a long time, we've had our free email newsletter, which folks have been able to get at join.assemblycall.com, and that comes with our weekly Six Banner Sunday kind of news roundup, and then I would always send out occasional stuff. And then we have our community, our paid premium community, which your IU Film Room has been a part of now for the last year and a half, I think, or something like that.
Yep.
And just incredible content that you put out with breakdowns of sets Indiana runs, or breakdowns of prospects, really in-depth video work that just allows IU fans to kind of have a more educated, insightful view and just kind of understand at a little bit of a deeper level what's going on from a basketball perspective. Because I think you're really good at breaking that stuff down into simple terms that people are able to understand. We've never really had something in between there. It was like, okay, you can get on the free newsletter, or you can get the community and get all of that stuff. And I think we kind of realized, well, there's some people in the middle that may not want the community experience, but for a lesser price might want to get your content. And so we're starting a premium paid newsletter. You can learn more about it at iufilmroom.com. You can go, it's up, you can start with it right now, and there's actually a 20% launch discount, which we're going to run for maybe this week and next week until kind of this launch phase is over. But basically, we want to provide your IU Film Room content to those folks who subscribe to the premium newsletter. So it doesn't come with the community access, but if you just want Tony's in-depth content, which is going to feature, and I'll hand this over to you, in just a second, so you can kind of, explain more about what you have planned. But from, kind of general basketball 101 and 201 content to, hey, here are the sets Indiana's running, it's going to be in there. There's going to be regular emails, and I think it'll just kind of enrich the fan experience by having that. So if you go to iufilmroom.com, you can get the basics, you can get started. We'll probably start sending those emails next week or the week after, something like that. I'm really excited about this, though, because your content is so good. And every time you post something in the community, I'm like, damn, I wish everybody else could get this because it's so good. And it makes the conversation better. Like, for me, someone who, who's in there in the community, it makes the conversation so much better when people start from the framework of this education that you've given them. And, now we're kind of all on, kind of more of a similar level talking about this stuff. So let me kick it over to you and kind of what you're envisioning for that, because you'll be writing most of the emails and I'll chime in every now and then with some statistical analysis. But a lot of it's going to be your stuff, and I can't wait to be able to share this with more IU fans and Assembly Call audience members.
Absolutely. And, this is something that we've obviously been talking about for quite some time together in doing. And, now is finally a great time for launch, with content plan and things in place. But, more so than anything, I absolutely love the game of basketball. So much so that I've I'm coaching a 6th grade AAU basketball team right now, which if that doesn't scream how much you love the game and hate yourself, then no, I'm kidding. I love my team, but and it's in film work and that type of thing. It's always something that when I've coached that I've really thrown myself into. Even when I was like the freshman coach at Southport High School, I many times got tasked with scouting reports and film work. After I proved myself, because our head coach really liked the work that I did, and I loved doing it. And just helped me see the game at a different level. They always say the eye in the sky doesn't lie. And so, that's really where, now that I don't coach high school basketball anymore because of jobs and kids and things, this IU film room has been kind of where I can scratch that itch. And in doing that, it does take a lot of time, to do these things. And I absolutely love it. I don't know where I was going with that, but with that said, I'm super excited about this email because it'll be very thorough and I'll be able to dive into things at a deep level. But because it's, we're looking at a weekly cadence, I'll be able to do a lot of different things and talk about a lot of different things, or dive deeper on, like, let's say one player or what one player did in one particular game. Or even, you could look at one play and how it all developed. Like, there's so many different things that you can look through that I'm going to be diving into deep, and then just what we have planned for this summer. We've got looking back at the 22-23 season, looking at sets, the common sets IU ran, diving into each player, what worked for them, what jumps do they need to make, what jumps will they probably not be able to make because there's limitations on their skill sets. And there's, if you follow me on Twitter, I do threads oftentimes of just like when a prospect is visiting and things like that. I would say like that on steroids is what to kind of expect if you haven't consumed my film room content outside of Twitter, because that's where a lot of my like lower tier stuff, I guess, lives. And I'll still continue to do that stuff on Twitter, but just a deeper dive film room. You want a deeper look at just X's and O's in general in terms of basketball. That's what this is going to be all about. And I'm super excited. I'll do it if there's 1 subscriber or 20,000 subscribers. I would love for there to be 20,000, but I'm going to do this regardless because I love basketball and I love IU and I love breaking down their film. But the more people that can consume it, I think what I can do is educate at just a little bit of a deeper level than maybe you had previously. And that's the value that I think it'll bring the IU fan base.
Bob has promised to subscribe, so we will get at least 1 subscriber because Bob will be on there. Yeah, and it's, look, with a paid newsletter comes accountability and a certain level of professionalism that is expected, and that's how we want to treat this. And so that's what we're going to do. So go to iufilmroom.com. You can sign up now. If you have any issues with it, let us know. But we'll probably have that launch discount, which will be locked in for the lifetime of the newsletter, for the next 2 weeks or so. So hop on there. If you're in the community already, you don't need to get on the newsletter because you already get this content. Community members get this. We wanted to expand this out for non-community members. So we'll talk about it more moving forward. We'll probably send out some emails about it next week, but we just wanted to give you a heads up on it here. And I mean, I'm just so excited. Tony, it was one of those things we kind of went through the season. It's like, we want more people to see this. How do we get this to more people? So this was the solution. I think it's a good one. I hope it's a good one. You can give us your feedback on that, but excited to get that out there. So with that said, let's talk about rosters and lineups because, Tony, you're not supposed to talk about secret Discord groups, which you mentioned earlier, but we are. Some of us are in a Discord, and we like to go back and forth on these lineup combinations and kind of nerd out on what Indiana can be next year.
Hey, for full disclosure, I'm in like 6 of them, so they're not secrets anymore.
So you look at the roster, and the way that I kind of look at it, Indiana has 2 primary ball handlers in Xavier Johnson and Gabe Cupps. You got a whole bunch of wings and Trey Galloway, Mackenzie Mbako, CJ Gunn, Caleb Banks, Ja'Kai Newton, Anthony Walker, and Anthony Leal that all bring different skills to the table. And then you've got bigs, Khalil Ware, Malik Renew, and Peyton Sparks. That's 12 guys, obviously, then with the scholarship open. I think if you asked most IU fans right now, what will the starting lineup look like? I think the odds-on favorite to start would be Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway, Mackenzie Mbako, Malik Renew, and Khalil Ware. We'll see what happens. And the starting lineup only matters so much. But what I think has a lot of us intrigued, and to be fair, we often get intrigued by this in the offseason when, theoretical lineup combinations sound better than they end up actually looking in February. But it does actually feel like this roster has the potential to be more versatile and multiple and malleable based on what Indiana is facing. Kind of the strength of Indiana the last couple seasons has also been its weakness, which is they did a few particular things outstandingly well, but if they were in the wrong matchup or those things weren't working, there weren't lots of plans B or C or D that you could trust. I think with this year's roster, and Bob, correct me if you disagree, I don't think we have the plan A that maybe you trust as much as Indiana's had before, but it's really easy to see what plan B, C, and D might be. And so that is, it's a little bit scary, and I think it's why there's some uncertainty, but it's also very intriguing for what this team could be. Do you agree with that general assessment of the roster as an overview?
I do. I think, you looked at last year and, I think the one thing is clear that, especially initially, Xavier Johnson will be, if IU needs something, the guy that'll be trusted to create initially will be XJ. They'll find ways of getting him in that position. Past that, I really can't tell you how it's going to look. I'm racking my brain on what big wings look like. When you look at that starting lineup, I keep thinking, how do you play 2 4s together? I've been thinking about it for a year, but there's not that definitive. Like last year going into this, we figured XJ and Trace Jackson Davis obviously would be Trace Jackson Davis option 1, XJ and TJD and 2-man game, and everybody else just kind of falling into place. We figured Jalen Hood-Scafino would eventually kind of run into that where you have multiple options playing in those areas. But no, I don't think you have that same, okay, and if you're running a scouting report in the first game of the season against Indiana, where do you focus? I think it's a hard question of, okay, we just kind of feel them out and see what they're up to, maybe through the first 3 to 5 games as they're trying to feel out what they're trying to do, where they're, where they are. And as Woodson plays with lineups and the like we're going to be talking about here in a minute. But no, I think that there's more versatility in those 3, 4, and 5 scorer positions. And I think that's true going maybe 9, even 10 deep for IU than what we saw the last 2 seasons, and definitely the last, I'd say, 6. So it's exciting in that area.
Yeah, so let's jump in here. I'm curious to hear, what kind of lineups are just intriguing to you. And again, these aren't like, here, we think this should be the starting or closing lineup. These are just lineups that we're kind of intrigued by because they have potential. And it's important to note, I think we have a pretty good idea what we're going to get out of X. And we hope it's maybe a little bit higher efficiency than what he's been before. But X has a long track record. We know who he is. Who is Khalil Ware? Who is second-year Malik Renew? Because we've heard there's a lot of things in his game that we haven't seen yet that, he saw at Montverde that we haven't seen. What is Mackenzie Mbako going to be as a freshman? Does CJ Gunn step up and become a reliable shooter? Trey Galloway, I feel like we have a pretty good idea of who he is. Not that he can't add elements to his game, but he's probably the other guy that you know what you're going to get. What's Caleb Banks going to be? How ready are Gabe Cupps and Ja'Kai Newton? So, there's so many questions. And so I just want to preface it, by saying that there's a lot of intrigue. Once the games start, we'll kind of know, okay, can Khalil Ware actually shoot? Because lineups sound good when you have him out there as a potential floor spacer. We'll have to see if that actually happens. So we get all of that. Just wanted to offer those caveats up front. But now let's just have a little bit of fun. Put all the questions aside. Let's just have fun talking about some lineups because there's a lot of really interesting pieces. So, Tony, I know we all kind of created some lineups here. Tony, you go first with one that especially intrigues you.
This wasn't necessarily one that intrigued me, but one that I think we're going to have to see just because of IU being in the Big Ten. I think I called it my Big Ten lineup. It's Xavier Johnson, Gabe Cupps, Trey Galloway, Malik Renew, and Peyton Sparks.
Oh boy.
And, just kind of 2 plotting bigs, That Sparks is very much a back to basket, big body, kind of slow footed, your traditional kind of Big Ten player. Same with Renew, and then you've got Galloway that's out there to kind of guard the best wing that's on the floor for the opponent, and then you've got two ball handlers in Xavier Johnson and Gabe Cupp. So not necessarily super intriguing to me. It's actually probably the least intriguing, but I think it's one that because of where the Big Ten's at, that you might see Indiana have to employ every now and again.
So let me ask you, what is a matchup where you would see that? Because I thought about that, but I could never bring myself to put Renew and Sparks in the same lineup because it just seemed like it's almost less than what you had with Trace and Race, and we knew the limitations those guys had. So what would you actually play that lineup against?
Maybe at Purdue, you might be forced to, or Kalel gets in foul trouble early, or has the flu that game. I feel like Trace got sick like twice against Purdue in his 4 years there. But no, I could see a Purdue or put me on the spot here. Who else
No,
has
I mean that is one
Wisconsin,
thing with
perhaps?
the bigs. Yeah, I mean, you do have some potential foul trouble issues there, especially, we saw that with a guy like Malik. So I'm not saying you wouldn't see it. I was just curious if there was a matchup in particular you thought that lineup could take advantage of. Or if it's just one that we're going to see just because Big Ten basketball is Big Ten basketball.
Yeah, I think it's more of necessity than like want to.
All
right, Bob, what is a lineup that intrigues you?
One that I keep thinking of is it would be start with XJ, CJ Gunn, Caleb Banks, and then Mbako and Renew playing maybe the 5 spot. And I kind of throw that out from a stand, I kind of think of what do you do with Caleb Banks, as one of those bigger wings, and do you kind of move, how when you're trying to segment your Mbako, Renew, and Ware, and you want to give them each a breather, and you want to give Banks that time, how do you do that? And you find a way to just kind of have Banks moving between, for lack of a better term, that 3 and 4 spot, as well as, and then moving Renew and Ware in through the post position. And then putting CJ Gunn in with that, one of the things that I think we've all kind of talked about is we love Trey Galloway, great glue ball player, but we're looking at 30-minute Trey Galloway is probably not where everyone wants him to be, on the coaching staff and across the board. And it's more or less at that point, we then realize that a CJ Gunn or a Ja'Kai Newton has kind of stepped into that role more. And so when you kind of look at, CJ being able to kind of step in there and play, maybe that, from that 16-minute or that 12-minute mark to the 4-minute mark of the second half, can we get that sort of, get offensive production out of him? And then even looking at, when it's time for XJ to take a breather also, Gabe Cups, would Cups and Gunn play well together, and throwing him into that equation. But really kind of thinking about how they use both of those players, and they use them in concert together, knowing there's also a good chance that the two of them will be playing together, whether they're starting or they're coming off the bench for really the next 3 seasons, we're hoping.
One of the things that becomes immediately clear as soon as you start playing with lineup permutations is that CJ Gunn is clearly the X factor, because I find myself always wanting to put him in the lineup, because as that kind of theoretical knockdown shooter at the 2, he just fits with so many lineups. We have to see, if he's ready for that. A lot of us have confidence in him and think that leap is there. But that really becomes clear, because if he becomes a reliable scorer at that spot, it unlocks a lot of different things for this team. And that's not a knock on Trey, because there's a lot of lineups where Trey is going to be valuable, and CJ and Trey can play together. But, CJ's development is just obviously huge this season. So one of the lineups for me that I'm really intrigued by is kind of the length and speed lineup. If you're playing against some bigger teams and you just really want to suffocate someone defensively, obviously X is going to play. Then you throw Caleb Banks out there with his, 6'7" in length. Anthony Walker, the transfer, goes out there. Again, another tall, long, athletic defender. Khalil Ware to defend the rim. And then at that 2 spot, really it's, if CJ is the shooter we hope he can be, he could slot in there, or Mbako could slot in there as a guy. You probably don't want to play him too often at the 2 in kind of a secondary ball handling position. But if you have X, X can handle all the ball handling duties when he's out there, so I don't worry about that. But now you're going 6'3", potentially 6'8", 6'7", 6'8", 7'1", athletic, switchable, and guys who, have proven themselves to be good defenders. That for Big Ten teams that are a little bit slower and more plodding, what do you do against that lineup defensively? And again, I think it's limited enough offensively that you wouldn't want it to be out there too long. But boy, that could really be devastating defensively. And I think that's what really starts to get interesting. And that's not even having Trey Galloway out there. And you would think, well, why isn't Trey in a defensive lineup? Well, as good of a defender as Trey is, there are certain matchups that he can struggle with. And so this should be one, if you're facing a little bit more athleticism and length, you can counter with this. There's no one in the Big Ten that can match that. So that one intrigues me. I think there's a ton of defensive versatility and transition. That team's going to be able to get out in transition and just beat everybody down the court. So I'm definitely intrigued by that one. Tony?
Yeah, I kind of had a very similar one, but I kind of took a page out of like Miami's book, where their tallest guy in the court was 6'8", and I actually went with one that was XJ, Gunn, Newton, Mbako at the 4, and Walker at the 5. Very small, athletic lineup that you're still going to have some length out there to be able to defend, but it's like everybody's the same size, and you're a tough matchup, and you're just running and gunning. So that was more of one to take out of like the Miami book. The Indiana will actually have a roster that could play somewhat like Miami did, is exciting and intriguing to me. But I think Gunn is the X factor, and I think we really are probably going to have to be really patient with Newton. He missed a lot of time playing basketball, and he's not even. I think actually somebody just said it in the chat. Not sure that he's even 100% healthy quite yet. Was just cleared for basketball stuff and all that. But, we're probably going to have to be pretty patient with him. A high-flying athlete that is a very skilled basketball player, but missing that valuable time, is going to hurt him, not to sugarcoat it or anything like that. So, the idea of Newton is probably better to me right now than like what he is in practice. But people can always surprise as well.
I love Ja'Kai. I think he's one of the most important building blocks for the future of the team, the program. The way I'm looking at it, Bob, is I'm kind of going into this not expecting much from him as a freshman, and just who knows, he could redshirt. So I'm going to be surprised if he gives us a lot. So I didn't put him in a lot of these. It's not because I don't believe in him. I think he's going to be a terrific player. As I've said many times, he reminds me so much of all those guys that we saw at FAU just running circles around people in the NCAA tournament. I just don't know how much we'll get from him this season, again, given that he didn't play. So I agree with you there, Tony. Next lineup for you, Bob, and any thoughts on Ja'Kai as well?
Well, and to kind of go back, because I think this will segue into my next lineup, which is the lineup nobody wants me to talk about, which is the Mike Woodson second lineup that I think it's going to be. As the eyes roll and people, no, we're not talking about it. Maybe approach it. I think Ja'Kai may be a lot like when we saw Armaan Franklin play for IU with his freshman season. I see Ja'Kai kind of maybe filling that role, and really there was all the reason in the world for Armaan to play that year that he played, and still the development wasn't where the program wanted him to be. And I think with Ja'Kai, it's just going to, by getting back out on the floor, and also you lost a year of development, you've lost a year of of conditioning and everything else. It may be a little bit tough for him to just come right into here's a Power 5, top 15 program. And you're going to be playing a top 15 you're going to be playing a big boy schedule. So, I'll be interested to see early in the season kind of how those first few reps look. It was like when we saw Caleb Banks last year and saw him grow into the role. It'll be interesting to see where Ja'Kai kind of starts in those areas. So with that in mind, I kind of look at that second run team, and you see that 10-minute mark, here come the last two subs for those 5 possessions to see it during Big Ten play. Or also when we're up 35 points in a bye game and it's 16-minute mark of the second half, and let's see which of these guys are going to step up and kind of develop or show who's a scorer, who scores, who does the right thing on defense. Those are that group. I think you see Gabe Cupps, who I think is going to be spelling 8 to 10 minutes at the point guard spot for XJ, a great deal. CJ again at that too, or maybe Ja'Kai, depending on development. And then you're looking at Banks, Walker, and Sparks in those fifth positions. Although it's also possible that maybe Walker doesn't play in that area. That you could see Banks get dunked down, see CJ go into that 3 role, and then you bring Ja'Kai in as a 2. And then that's that group that comes out again, 3 to 5 possessions a game. Let's just see which guy steps up and steps into positioning and develops as when there's not the XJs out on the floor to be able to kind of carry the load. So I think that second lineup early on is going to be indicative, I think, of kind of what Mike Woodson sees and what he's thinking about.
Yeah, I do think that is something that we'll see probably a lot in the non-conference. X's usage and playing time, I guess would be the more specific word, is going to be interesting to me. I feel like and hope in some of the non-conference games, obviously he'll get plenty of rest, and there's going to be some games where he gets in foul trouble. But especially given how Mike Woodson ended up playing Jalen Hood-Schifino and Trace Jackson-Davis last year, I'm not going to be surprised if X is playing 38, 39, 40 minutes in Big Ten play because he can do it, even with the load that he carries, on both ends. And so that's going to be interesting. But I mean, it's all of these lineups kind of have him because he's such a linchpin, Tony.
Yeah, I created a second unit lineup as well, and I had Newton in it and no Walker. What I've been told about Sparks and Walker is that Sparks was told he'll have a role. Walker was told he'll have a chance to compete for a role. And so I think that's important. That when Indiana talked with Walker, they're like, look, you're going to have a shot. We're not going to guarantee you anything. But I think when they talk with Sparks, they're like, look, you're going to be our backup 5. So I'm intrigued.
And given
on
Renew's
that.
foul trouble, he's going to have opportunities.
Right, exactly.
Malik is not going to fix that in one offseason.
Unless he goes like the Zach Edey route and just goes from high foul rate to no foul rate real quick.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. All right. Where are we at? Tony, is it your turn for a lineup?
Sure. Okay. I'll go with what I called a ball handling lineup, which was XJ, Cupps, Galloway, Mbako, and Ware.
You stole mine. That was my next one. I called it the press breaker.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's a really good one.
Breaker. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's one that intrigues me. I like the press breaker. Your name is better, so you should have staked claim to that one.
The thing that's fun about that one, I mean, obviously you've got the ball handlers and X and Gabe and Trey, so that's going to make it really hard to press because you've got 3 guys who can break the press. But then once you break the press, what can you do with it? And with Mbako and Ware, you just have all kinds of talent and versatility at the other end of the court to take advantage of a scrambling defense. Whether it's a lob to Kalel or Kalel drifts out for a 3 or Mbako can score at all 3 levels. I think that's going to be a really tough lineup for people to try and contain. Because that X and Gabe are going to give you that reliable ball handling, but you need someone to convert on the other end, and that's where Indiana didn't always have that. If it was Race Thompson, Miller Kopp on the other end can make a transition 3, but he's otherwise kind of limited. Trace obviously was a great passer and could score in the post, but wasn't always going to create something after you kind of broke the press unless it was just an easy fast break layup. I think Mbako and Ware are just more multiple in how they can, score the ball. What do you do when you've got X charging at you and then those 2 guys back there? I think that puts the defense in a real bind. So that lineup to me, and then Trey, you could switch out. Either Trey or Cupps can be the second ball handler, and then you have, if CJ, steps up, then he could be a guy there. But that kind of lineup to me is really interesting for some specific situations.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fun one. At least on paper. Here we'll be in December or January.
It's
and we'll
June.
be-
It's all paper,
yeah.
Tony.
Exactly. And it is funny though, because you can put all these, like you said, all these permutations together, and then it all comes to fruition in the season, and you're like, what was I thinking? Like, how did I ever think those guys would play together, or whatever the case may be? But it's super fun to do June 1st.
Exactly. Bob, let me ask you this question. And Tony, I want to get your thoughts on it too. As I mentioned before, I think everybody's kind of writing, if not in, maybe it's not in pen, but it's close, that Mbako, Renew, and Ware, are kind of the three guys that you put in there. And I think we all acknowledge it's not perfect. Like, Mbako probably profiles as a better 4 than he is a 3. Renew, at least based on what we've seen, probably profiles a little better as a 5 than a 4. But you've got 7-1, potential top 10 pick Kalel Ware there. So I think you kind of start with X and Kalel, in your best lineups, and you build from there. And Mbako and Renew are clearly the other two most talented players. And so you don't want to outthink yourself. Like, just get them on the court and figure it out. But how do you really see that working together? And what are your concerns, about those three guys together? Because we're going to see them a lot. There's no question about it.
My biggest concern is first off Renew's handle followed by Mbako's handle, and straight line drives, especially with both of them. Someone watching Renew putting the ball on the deck was a little scary at times last season. And the question is, can he work on that element of his game, knowing that he's going to be, probably doing, a lot of high post to low post movements and whatever offensive schemes, sets, philosophy that they're running. He's a really good passer. We can see if his shot develops too. I mean, we know he's got a little bit of range. We know that he's shown that in the past, but it's that ability to attack a closeout for both of those players. Because if both struggle with it, then we're kind of where we were last year with both Kopp and Thompson on the floor at the same time. Not saying that it's going to be exactly the same, but at least on that one element of the game. I do think that both have a much higher ceiling than those players in that area. But I'm more concerned about the ability for the driving the ball from the wings and those than I am most anything else. I think defensively, with their length, I mean, I was watching some of Renew playing, I believe it was Miller from Miami, and I felt like him on the perimeter. He's very mobile. He's not an aircraft carrier. He can move his feet well, and the great thing about the length is you can maybe take a step back and still be able to challenge the shot. It's not like a 6'4" guy guarding a guy on the perimeter. You got to take a step back. He can get there and be able to alter a shot quickly without having to be right up on a player in that situation. And you can also do the same thing in passing lanes and the like. That length is really invaluable in those areas. So I'm not as worried about them. It's not. I don't feel like I did a couple of years ago when it was Justin Smith, Trace Jackson Davis, and Joey Brunk, where it's like I feel like we're playing. You're playing 2 5s and a 4.
But we've come a long way from that, haven't we?
This ain't the. And I see it every once in a while go on a board and someone brings that up. And it's like, it's not the same thing. This is a much, much different group, but it is something that, I think that the ability to drive the basketball and the ability to attack closeout is going to be something I'm looking for really early in the season.
Tony, what do you think about the three of them together? I mean, do you buy the premise that kind of by default, those are going to be the guys that are out there because they're the most talented players, even if they don't quite fit perfectly what we envision for those positions?
I do think that. Yeah, I think, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think what we're going to find is that a lot of IU fans are going to be impressed and surprised at what Malik Renew can do away from the basket. At Montverde, he was showcased a much wider skill set than what he did last year, which, isn't to put him down or anything. Like, he was playing Big Ten, big boy basketball, and he went to what was really comfortable for him, which was a baby hook. I think we're going to be impressed by what his body looks like. I think he had some baby fat, for just lack of a better term, to shed. That, I know Cliff Marshall is going to be working super hard with him on his body. And so that I think we're going to be impressed by. But I think people are going to be impressed by how good of a 4 he actually can be. And I do truly believe and think that he'll be just fine at the 4 spot. Mbako, it's hard to gauge to say if he can do those things at the Big Ten or Power 5 level, but in high school he was very capable of being a wing and 3 spot. And so then with Ware, a lot of versatility and able to protect the rim. So like that 3-4-5, there's certainly going to be some offensive limitations. Everybody's got them. There's not too many teams in the country that aren't going to have some sort of limitation on one end of the floor. But then on the opposite end, as Bob said, on defense, that should be a suffocating front line. A lot of length, a lot of size. Then you've got Ware there protecting the rim, especially in Mike Woodson's defensive scheme, which is basically funneling everything to the rim. You've got a 7'1" with 7'9" wingspan guy back there. That's a lot to handle. So there's certainly concerns that are valid about kind of the roster makeup, I guess, if you're looking at it just from like a starting 5 perspective. But I guess my counter to that would be that every team in the country is probably focused on what their limitations are right now. But when you look at what the lineup is capable of and what their ceiling is, that's what gets me excited, is because it's just a completely different brand of basketball than we've seen at Indiana for quite some time. Probably since 2016, when they won the Big Ten. Like it's been a while since we've kind of seen like Indiana playing at like a modern style.
Yeah, and if you're going to have questions and maybe a little bit of an awkward fit, make it with 3 5-star guys. Where like some of that awkward fit may just be negated by the fact that, oh man, those guys are just really good players. And boy, this didn't work out well, but Malik got the rebound and put it back. That is one thing I think about this team. Last year, rebounding was an issue from day one because you basically had Trace and not a whole lot else, because Race just wasn't quite himself as a rebounder. Miller wasn't going to go get you a lot of rebounds. I think Indiana could very well be a top 25 rebounding team in the country this year. And that's kind of an underrated thing that we don't often talk about in the offseason that could have a big impact on helping to negate, some of those little awkward fit issues where you can just go increase your offensive efficiency because you're able to get offensive rebounds and convert them. And this roster appears much more likely to be able to do that, both starters and bench. And the other thing with Malik at the 4, Bob, you mentioned this. I thought one of the individual player skills that most improved from the beginning of the year to the end of the year was Malik's ability to defend out in space and on the perimeter. I thought he looked like a fish out of water early in the season, and he was much more comfortable late. And the fact that you now have a center in Khalil Ware who, he was a 29% three-point shooter on decent volume last year. Pretty good for a 7'1" freshman. If he can shoot 33% from 3, and really be a kind of a pick and pop threat, or just, be able to drift out there and space the floor, now Malik can be the guy who's on the block. Whereas last year it was a lot of him and Trace together, where Trace has that spot. So that makes the fit a little bit better and allows Malik to kind of play to his strengths. Khalil can do his thing. I think those two guys together fascinate me with all the different ways that they can play together. And I don't think any team in the Big Ten is going to have a lot of answers for them when they're clicking, because they have more talent and more athleticism than any other Big Ten front line.
And I would just throw in, you brought up a great point about rebounding. It's not just the offensive rebounds. Kind of like I look at like the Carolina teams of the mid-2010s where they had big wings like we're talking about and won a national championship. Even though the three-point shooting wasn't great, because they were rebounding so well, they were able to get get points, get second chance opportunities. But you also got 5 guys that can initiate a break. You get that ball off, and there's Ware rip, and okay, he gets it over Edey. He's blowing down the floor, and he made 2-3 dribbles, hits XJ, and where is really dangerous as a 3-point shooter. I was kind of watching watching his 3-point shots when he first committed to IU. Transition threes. that guy sets up out at the top of the key, and that's his spot. That's his shot. So that's hard. How do you guard that if you're a Big Ten center, your traditional plotting Big Ten center compared to other conference, types of guys? I mean, and then if you can't guard it, then you're right into flow offense and you're getting great looks. But you got 5 guys who can get that thing up the floor in 3-4 seconds. It's hard for a lot of Big Ten teams to guard you. And my question with those 3 is, okay, if you're Greg Gard, you have to put Connor Segan on one of those guys. Who are you going to put him on?
It's a good question. It's a very good question.
So.
Tony, final thoughts on this before we jump to the mailbag.
Yeah, I mean, more than anything, like I said, it's exciting to be playing at this style that has showcased it's kind of the style you need to play at to contend on a national level. And, you might have to take a backseat to being a second-tier Big Ten team to maybe compete at the national level. We've seen Michigan do it a couple times. I mean, I think 2 seasons ago, Michigan, kind of squeaked into the NCAA tournament, and then they were the last Big Ten team standing, just kind of based on their roster makeup being more geared towards March than the Big Ten. And I think Mike Woodson's done a nice job of kind of having pieces to do both. I think that Peyton Sparks pickup is 100% a pickup you get to compete in the Big Ten. But then your Anthony Walker pickup, that's more one you're trying to compete in March with a guy like that. So I'm loving the roster makeup. Do all the pieces fit perfectly? No. Still one scholarship open as well, which is intriguing on what Indiana might do there. But overall, when I was doing these lineup combinations, it kind of gets you giddy, and the juice is flowing about, your press break lineups or your big lineups, your small ball lineups, whatever the case may be. It's got me ready for November, only in terms of basketball, not weather.
Well, and this is why, going back to the banner moment, this is why Xavier Johnson is so important, because he makes a lot of this stuff make sense. And it's a heavy burden for him, but he's a 6-year senior that has been around the block a lot, and again seems ready for this challenge. And when you can start with him and a center like Kalel Ware, who again theoretically we've got to see it, consistently throughout a season, but who can do all the things that he can do, it gives you a lot of freedom to mix and match around those guys in ways that make sense. And that for Indiana is something that we haven't had in a while. And so, again, I think there'll be ups and downs. I think it's going to take a little while for this all to coalesce. I think there's going to be games where we come on here and like, what the hell was that? And there's going to be other games where it's like, holy crap, that's as good as we've seen an IU team play in a long time, because the talent is just overwhelming. We probably need to prepare ourselves for that, but hopefully it all leads to, a team that really makes a lot of sense and hits its stride in February and March. Okay. Let's move on now. We've got a few really good mailbag questions, some of them related to what we just discussed. And so we will get to those next here as we keep going on the Assembly Call. Stick with us. Heater on an 8-0 run. Cut it to 13.
Uh-oh. Jerod, were you alluding to Indiana might not go undefeated next year? Is that what you were saying to close that segment?
I don't think so. I don't think we're going to go undefeated. And I won't be shocked if there's a couple of ugly losses in the non-conference either. Like, I think there could be some awkwardness early with just so many new pieces. But again, just get the talent. We've got good players. I mean, I think we're going to be able to figure it out because, again, I think we've got the point guard to help us do it. So, I am trying this offseason to be a little bit more realistic, because I, as much as anybody, can get caught up in the idealized version of CJ is going to become, a 38% three-point shooter, and everybody becomes the best version of themselves. Chances are half the guys will, half the guys won't. Trey may not develop anymore. We may get the Trey from last year, which is, fine. Caleb, it may take him another year. Maybe Kalel struggles. All these things could happen. But, ultimately, when you look at the experienced point guard, the talent down low, and some of the potential on the bench, it's, given what this looked like for a while in the offseason, we're in quite a good spot, I think. So
Absolutely.
very excited about that. Okay, let's hop in here and wrap this up with a few final questions. Here we go.
Hi, it's Thomas Bryant. What's the only thing better than being Kentucky in the NCAA tournament? Celebrating it with friends afterwards. Join Jerod, Andy, Ryan, and Coach after every IU basketball game. Go Hoosiers.
I don't have intros from Victor and Cody, so we're just going to go with Thomas Bryant again since he's playing in the NBA Finals. I'm Jerod Morris here with Coach Bob Moats, the coach Tony Adragna. We just had fun for about a half hour diving into all the different lineup permutations that Indiana could play. We will be doing a lot more of that as we go in the offseason. As I mentioned to you guys in the chat, we have to take a break because we could probably do this for hours and hours and hours and continue to have fun with it, but we have to stop somewhere. Let's go to our mailbag. All of these questions submitted in our private community, which you can learn more about at assemblycall.com/community. Or if you don't want the full community experience, but you want to get Tony's IU Film Room content, you can get that at iufilmroom.com. So we have a couple of options for you. Bob, we have a question from a gentleman named Mike, who I think you might be familiar with. You may have spoken with him a time or two. And this question probably could be an entire episode, but I'm going to ask it anyway and let you guys maybe do a short answer, and then maybe we'll expand on it later. He says, what new sets or looks could you envision IU utilizing next year, given how different the skill sets are between the incoming and outgoing players? So, again, we could talk about this forever, but do you have a short answer to this question?
Short answer is and great things come out of Terre Haute, Indiana. I would say that motion weak, motion strong, some of the stuff that Greg Popovich developed at San Antonio, where you have some flexible, five guys, five options on scoring, and really what those sets and what those concepts develop is where do you move a point guard after an entry pass into the offense, and so weak goes to the weak side, and then there's a way to bring a wing down to set a cross screen, and then all of a sudden you got a post look, you've got an attack from the point. You could put Mbako on the motion strong side where they set two stagger screens and bring a guy, whether it's Trey Galloway, CJ Gunn, whomever off of those. And then, work into two-man game, work into all sorts of fun stuff. I think so much of this comes down to, for Indiana, it's looking at skill sets, and with Woodson's read and react concepts, can he develop a system that works for, with the players that he has there, in those positions. So I really think that we'll see more of those types of areas where it's going to be less looking at the post all the time. We're looking at, that sort of two option thing where you actually see more five option and a lot more cutting and that sort of thing out of these types of actions.
If you're curious what some of that stuff may look like, these are the kinds of things Tony's going to be writing about in the newsletter. Tony, what do what are kind of some general thoughts you have on how, the offense may look different this year?
Yeah. First things first, I was hoping you were going to actually read the intro on the run sheet here. Hi, I'm Brian Tonsoni here with Galen Clavio and Ryan Phillips.
I'm not Ron Burgundy, Tony. I can adjust on the fly, even if I forget to change something on the run sheet.
I was banking on it. No, but in terms of offense, I was looking at it from more of like what sets might we see more of and things like that. Indiana ran a lot of zoom last year, and I think you're going to see a lot of it again this coming season. Zoom action is essentially you got a guy standing in the corner and you've got a down screen and a dribble handoff happening at the same time for that guy. So it's basically like he's coming off of a double screen into a ball screen. And
we did this with Jalen all the time.
Jalen Hood-Schifino scored about 30 points against Purdue doing that exact action. I think you're going to see a lot of that, with the likes of like an Mbako, or it could be a CJ Gunn. You could see it ran for Xavier Johnson, and you've got a lot of good action happening on the weak side to occupy help side defense. So that's not necessarily new because Indiana ran it a ton, but I think you're going to see it more and more because it's a 5-out type offense. And you can run counters out of it, as teams start to key on you. Indiana ran a great counter against Kent State where Kent State was kind of overplaying Jalen Hood-Schifino because he kept coming off that zoom action one after another, so they overplayed it. Mike Woodson comes out of a timeout. Kent State's overplaying it, runs a backdoor. Jalen Hood-Schifino gets a dunk, and it kind of like sealed the deal for that game. Then there's Spain actions, what they call Spain. It's essentially a ball screen for a guard to come off of, and then somebody sets a back screen for the big that set the ball screen. So I could see those type of actions that are Xavier Johnson coming off a ball screen from Ware, and then Ware receives a back screen from whoever a shooter is in the lineup, and you've got Ware running to the rim, hopefully free. You've got Xavier Johnson, who is an excellent at lob passes, and then the guy who set the back screen, he's going to pop to the top of the key if his man helps on Ware, and so there's a lot of great stuff you can do there. And then something new would be like Iverson ISOs. And so Mike Woodson did it a ton with Carmelo Anthony, and I see Mbako kind of that mellow mold. Hell, they even called him to help in terms of recruitment. But essentially what an Iverson screen is you've got four guys at the top, in an alignment, two guys on the elbows, two guys on the wings. You're going to send one guy underneath, and then the Iverson screen, the ball hand or the guy on the wing essentially goes over the two guys on the elbows to the opposite side of the floor. And then you can do a lot of stuff out of that, but it's essentially you're trying to isolate. It's called an Iverson because they ran it a lot for Allen Iverson to isolate him. And so I can see that type of action for like guys like Mbako or a CJ Gunn to get them out on the wing moving and then isolating from there. So Bob mentioned like straight line drives could be a little bit more difficult for guys like an Mbako, and actions like that will help them with that because they're able to get on the move. They've got their defender on their hip so they can catch and go, and they've kind of got a half a step already on them. So I could see actions like that, especially because Mike Woodson, I mean, he had ISO Joe, in Atlanta. He had Melo in New York. He's not afraid to isolate his best player if he thinks he's got a matchup against you. So I could see those types of things too, now that he's got super versatile wings that can, take somebody off the dribble.
The kind of stuff that works a lot better with talent than
Correct.
kind of trying to shoehorn in more one-dimensional players into those things. So very good. And we'll dive into a lot more of that stuff as we go forward. Question from Jeffrey: how much time will Cups and Newton get this season? I don't really have a feel for Newton, honestly. I don't know how ready he's going to be. I mean, if he is ready, he'll get some time and he's going to play, but I don't have a great feel for that one. My gut is it's not going to be a lot this season, but that's not based on a whole lot. It's just based on him coming off injury and, some of the other guys that we have. Cups is interesting. He's going to play. I don't think there's much from last season that you can look at because Jalen didn't really have a backup. I mean, Trey was basically his backup as a ball handler, but was also a starter. Mm-hmm. I think if you look to 2 years ago, though, you can envision Gabe in the Rob Finney role partly. And Rob played 32.3% of minutes while X played 66.4% of minutes. I think that number is going to go way up for X. There'll be games with foul trouble, and there'll be games early in the season where you don't ride him as hard. I think in Big Ten play, he's basically going to play as many minutes as he can handle. And Cups isn't necessarily the defensive closer that Finney was. Finney played some of those minutes because he was in defensive lineups at the end of games. So if Finney played 32% of minutes, I would say Cups is probably going to be around 25%, would be my guess. I think there will be some times he plays with X. There will certainly be some times where he backs him up. But then I think there will also be some games where he plays 3 or 4 minutes because X takes it, doesn't get in foul trouble, and Woody just doesn't really trust anybody else to be out there. So again, Newton, I don't have a great feel. My guess is it's low. Cups, I would say, will probably be in the 22 to 28% range as your backup point guard. Do you guys agree or have any other thoughts on that one?
I think so. I think about 10. I was thinking maybe between 10 to 16 a game. Depending on the matchup. Not assuming no injury. Yeah, with Cups. Newton, again, it's until we really see him come out. It's really hard to kind of tell if he's going to break a rotation or not at this point. But I'm interested to see how many times Woodson plays 2 point guards with both Cups and XJ. Does he set it up? And I know Tony was talking about Iverson screens, for example. You put Cups and XJ in there together. There are ways of kind of just getting XJ more off ball and having Cups act as more of a pure point. And they could do the same thing with Trey, obviously. But I think, getting Cups into that position where the two of them are on the court, on the floor, kind of, playing off each other a little bit, just maybe adds a little added dimension to IU's game overall. And if they can do that more effectively, I mean, that again, let's just assume we always assume CJ Gunn's going to have a breakout year, but if he's having an off game or finds foul trouble himself, and you need to put Galloway on the bench, you may be seeing more of that XJ and Cups type of look versus what we thought, what we traditionally thought coming into the year.
Yeah, and how ready is Cups to be a scorer? Like, is he a credible shooter as a freshman? And who can he defend? I mean, I think Gabe projects as a pretty good defender long term. Is he ready to be that guy as a freshman? If he can defend and shoot, I think, Rob Finney's offense was terrible his last year in Indiana overall. And so you could see Cups getting more minutes if he can do those things. I'm just trying to be a little bit conservative with, a freshman who's probably going to have some struggles with some of those things as we get into the season. From Jerod, not me, but another Jerod, do you realistically think we add one more player? If so, who would it be? Tony, I think, yes, it's realistic that we add another player. Clearly, they're out there looking for people. I think it's going to profile as one of two types of guys. It's either going to be a veteran who can step in right away and provide scoring and or playmaking from that 2 spot, hopefully both. But I think it's going to be a veteran. Or it's going to be a guy like, Mongolian Mike, who is a younger, more developmental guy, but doesn't really have a proxy on the current roster. Like, I don't think there's any reason why you would take a young 2-guard because you already have that guy in CJ Gunn. So what's the point in taking that guy? Mike is different than anything we've had on this roster because he's big and versatile, and he's a young guy you would want to take a chance on. So I think it's going to be one of those two types of players. I don't really see it being anyone else. Now, realistically, are there a lot of options out there right now? There are not a ton, but I think, we're going to keep looking for those. But I think it's going to be one of those two types of guys. Do you agree, or you think there's another type of player we might go after?
I completely agree. Those are the exact two types that I would have said myself. I think, like you mentioned, a Mongolian Mike, a little bit more of a long-term play, helps you not have to possibly replace like 6 guys next year, maybe, that you think his ceiling is high. But to me, like, you'd obviously want to be honest with him in that. And as a guy that entered the NBA draft talk this year, I don't know that he's going to really have the patience to kind of sit and wait on that. So I don't know what
he
those
also might
conversations
benefit from just playing,
right.
At a smaller school.
Right.
So.
And, which makes that's why I think his cut list was so vast. You had San Francisco, Memphis, Nebraska, Indiana, and Pitt, I think. So, it was just kind of a vast array of schools and tiers. So interesting.
If I were him, I would think pretty hard about Nebraska. I think Nebraska is a pretty good fit for him, honestly, because he's got playing time. The system that Hoiberg runs really fits him. That would be a pretty good landing spot for him, I think.
Yeah, I think. If I'm Hoiberg, I'm going as hard as I can after him.
Yeah.
But like you said, a veteran too is somebody that can instantly raise the ceiling of what this IU team is from a scoring and playmaking aspect. Is that a Reeves from Kentucky? Perhaps that's not a report. That's just me speculating. Something like that. I could see IU kicking the tires on and taking. If you asked me today, like, will IU add a 13th guy? My answer would be yes. But who that may be, I don't know.
Yeah, Bob.
And I take the counter on that. I think at this point, and there are some exceptional types of situations, like other than like promoting a walk on, or finding a coach, somebody in coaching whose kid is looking for a place to land for a year or two. I think it's really hard to find right now in the portal that guy that's going to raise the ceiling another, who's going to supplant anybody in the 9 or 10 guys we're talking about who are going to get significant minutes on this team. Do you do your due diligence? Of course. When you know that there's a guy out there that may be interested in you, like a Mongolian Mike or the kid from Kentucky. Yeah, you're making those. Yeah, you're going to make that. You're going to do that. And I think that's one of those for IU. I think the more you can kind of at this point now focus on your 2024, 2025, 2026. Yeah. Those classes, building those relationships, keeping your ear to the ground on other guys that might be looking next year or the year after, but really looking at building that 2024 class and spending that time to get to hit the ground between Halloween and Thanksgiving with some commits and building another top 10 to stack a class. I think that should, if I'm looking at a focus for this staff, that would be the one thing I'm really looking at versus, well, do we need a 13th scholarship guy? No, I think we'll be okay. I think we've got enough in place where this team will continue this team will be very competitive come, 9 months from now.
Yep. From Maria, how do you think we avoid being like Illinois last year, with a lot of talent but not much success? I think Coach Tonsoni has addressed this on numerous occasions. The biggest issue for Illinois last year is they had all this talent and no one to run the team. The difference with Indiana is we have one of the best point guards in the country to run the team and help make the pieces fit. That's why I trust that. That's why I think, we kind of talked about this early in the offseason. Hey, would you take Illinois' season last year as the floor? Most of us, I think maybe everybody here said yes, just because things felt so uncertain. Now I think it's very clear to see how Indiana can be better than what Illinois was last year, because you've got all these talented pieces, but you've also got the point guard to make it fit. I kind of look at Illinois last year now as the floor for what I expect from Indiana. Make the tournament. You're somewhat competitive in Big Ten play. You're a 9 seed. Like, that's a fine season. It just kind of keeps the momentum going. But I think the ceiling is much higher. Fair, Tony?
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I would argue, too, that, there seemed like there was a lot of kind of clashing personalities on Illinois. And, to me, if I have a team like that, I want Mike Woodson rather than Brad Underwood to kind of manage that. Yeah, I know. But so to me, I think that's a differential too, to kind of merging that success, because Mike Woodson's had to do that at the highest level with much larger egos and personalities than kind of what you've got at the college game. So, that's kind of my difference maker there as well.
From Jim Tom Hoosier, do you think people are sleeping on Ware and his potential to have a huge sophomore season? Bob, what do you think?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it 7-1 with 20 plus in range. The physical tools are all there. Bigs always develop, I think. I think bigs, Tony would agree with this, that bigs develop slower than wings or guards, just because of the physical transformation that their body has to undergo. And the other problem is you have to now realize that just because you're 7-1 doesn't mean that you get to dunk on everybody like you used to. Even when you're playing on the AAU circuit, you're still playing against 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds versus playing against grown men who have had 3-4 years in a college weight program and playing on a stage and a level with that's not really comparable. So I mean, I think with Ware, you look at that first season going, well, he didn't have as productive one as we would have, but no, it's. Again, he's trying out U19 for USA basketball. Clearly, people in this country, people in the basketball world are saying, this kid can play. We're not sure where he ranks just yet. We're not sure where he is, with the top 50 players in his group. But we know that there's a lot that this kid can offer whatever team's there. And I see him, if he with the year he has, I mean, I think he projects as a one at at least an early entrant in the draft, and we're looking at a guy that'll be an IU for one season, give the program his all, and move on to the next level. And I think in many respects, if IU can get him there, that's going to be successful down the road in recruiting, especially those top McDonald's All-American type bigs that Mike Woodson needs in his defensive scheme, as Tony alluded to.
That's best case scenario, right? Where being one and done at IU.
Yes, absolutely. The dumbest recurring conversation I've had to get into with people on social media is people who come at me with where analysis. Well, he 6 points, 4 rebounds as a freshman. You're getting all excited. If that's what you're focusing on, you're doing it wrong. That's not what you should focus on with this particular player. There were extenuating circumstances, and there's so much talent there. Give this kid a chance, because he had. If this guy is first team All Big Ten, it will not be a surprise. That's the level of talent that he has, and that's not even hyperbole. He's got. Now, I'm not saying he's going to get there. I mean, he's got, there are things he's got to do, and, he needs to bring it every game and all of those things. But talent, I mean, he's probably the most talented player in the conference. Depending on what you think of Xavier Booker or, some guys some of the guys at Michigan State. I mean, if an NBA team were just looking at the Big Ten, you were just saying you can take one of the guys off a Big Ten roster right now. Who's going in front of Khalil Ware? Mbako?
Yeah, right.
Maybe.
That's where we're at. So nothing is guaranteed, but that's a level of talent that's on this roster. And so as much as we all want to be cautious, and that's fine, it's also okay to get kind of excited about the level of talent, because these aren't the types of players that we've seen. So, balance it and stay cautious, but I don't know, kind of get excited too, because this is fun. So yes, Jim Tom, people are sleeping on him, but I think he's gonna be good. Last question from Phil. If we continue on the path of one and done, is it possible to sustain beyond Coach Woodson's tenure? I think the first thing here from Phil is the premise of this question is interesting. If we continue on the path of one and done, Indiana is not doing the Duke or Kentucky thing from a few years ago, where it's like, let's bring in 4 or 5 guys, they're all going to go pro, and then we reload. This is, hey, we found Jalen Hood-Schifino, featured him, one and done. Now, it is possible this season Indiana, could have 2 guys who are one and done in the program if things go well, with Khalil Ware, who would be a 2 and done officially, but a 1 and done at IU, and then Mackenzie Mbako. But I think if you're going to get that kind of talent, you take it, but you do also have to have an infrastructure, of guys you've developed, Tony. And that, Xavier Johnson represents that. Malik Renew is that type of guy, some of the young guys. So I wouldn't really say that we're on the path of one and done. I think what we're doing, at least what we've done so far, seems like a smart strategy, where it's when you have the ability to get talented guys like this, you get them, but you have to surround them with guys that you're developing in the program. And I think that's the path that we're on. And so I think this path is the smart one. I don't necessarily think we haven't yet demonstrated that we're in some kind of either or. Now, if we hit on every 2024 and 2025 guy we're after, maybe that occurs, but we'll deal with that problem when it comes. So I somewhat disagree with the premise of Phil's question, actually. Do you agree, or do you think there's maybe something more deeper there that we should look at?
I do agree. It's kind of a mixture of the Villanova and the Duke mold. Villanova kind of, tries to hit those sweet spot recruits that Mike talks about, or IU and Philly. And then, when we've got opportunities to get high level talent, you obviously want to go get it. Now I'll tweak his question and tell you what I don't necessarily know is sustainable beyond this tenure is, getting a late decommit 5-star every spring.
It happens every year, Tony. At some point, it's just a thing,
Yeah. I mean, eventually coincidences become trends. So I'll tweak the question and say that probably isn't sustainable. But I think we're in agreement that, I wouldn't say Indiana is a one and done approach to what they're doing in terms of roster building. But, with the transfer portal now too, it's all, you basically are going to have to remake at least a portion of your roster every offseason, more times than not. It's rare, at least a couple of, additions or subtractions. It's going to be rare where you're just going to have, seniors leave and your freshman class comes in and that's it. So that throws a wrench in the whole roster building aspect as well.
Thanks for using the term sweet spot, by the way. Now we have to pay Mike royalties for featuring that. On
Well,
the show.
he told me he'd give me half if I said it. So.
Bob, last word on this question, then we'll wrap up.
I actually, my earbuds just died on me again, guys. So I apologize right now for this. So I'm just going to kind of finish off here real quick that I don't think I use on a one and done strategy. I think they're finding the best guys they can get a hold of. I always felt like this upcoming season was going to be the next. It was going to be like a 1 year gap before they could get to the 24s, 25s, and really just field the most competitive team they can. You get, and again, they found, I think they hit the ball out of the park with this group for the 1 year that they're going to need to have in order to get guys in here like McNeely, Boogie Flan, whoever these guys end up being in 24, or Harrelson and Sicily coming in 25. And that's, there's really a lot to be excited about. And then from there, just kind of see where Mike Woodson takes it, because I think Woodson does believe strongly in that you have to have 4 year guys, as well as kids like Jalen Hood-Scafino, kids like Khalil Ware and Mbuke Mambako to play. And I think that's just necessary. So,
yep. All righty. Well, that is going to do it for us on this week's edition of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, you can join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Thank you to Bob Thompson for producing our music. Thank you to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logos. And thank you for listening. We will be back to talk IU hoops again with you next Thursday, as we always do. Until then,
Take it from me, Thomas Bryant. Keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim. Go Hoosiers.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Indiana basketball is the shit.
well said, Coach. Nuggets win 104-93. Probably not great for the Heat that they lost when Denver shot less than 30% from three.
Yeah, it's
probably a game where you
holding
need
them
to
to 104. Pretty incredible.
Though I will say, outscoring them 30-20 in the fourth quarter for the Heat probably gives them a little hope and momentum, at least going into game two.
That Heat zone defense, man, but it just it bugs those teams.
Yeah. Well, good show, fellas. Always great to have you guys on. Again, go to iufoamroom.com. Tony and I are going to be doing a lot with the newsletter. Very excited to bring that to you. Let's get that started. Tony's got a huge Google Doc with this long list of things that he's planning for to write in there. So there's going to be a lot. So if some of the X's and O's stuff, like an Iverson cut, if listening to the explanation didn't make a whole lot of sense, Tony will probably have a series on Iverson cuts, so you can see what it actually looks like, and it helps make a lot more sense. I have greatly benefited from this, from reading your content and watching your content, because I'm not really the X's and O's type guy, but it's really helped me see it more. So when you say what's a zoom action, I get it, I know it because I've watched that. So it's really, for me, it's really helped me kind of see the game at a more in-depth level. And that's what we want to bring to everybody listening. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm excited. I'm excited to kick it off. And I'm excited my iufilmroom.com domain can be used once again.
That's right. That is right. All right, guys, have a great night. We will see y'all inside the community and on Twitter and in secret Discords. And we'll talk to you all later.
Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.